Hello, everybody. It's Cotorey Seals here again. I'm here bringing to you the second installment of the Mishpat series. I just want to thank everybody at Iowa State and your overall support and letting me come and be with you guys. As you know, the video wasn't that clear, so I just thought I would videotape it again and give it to you as if you are present with me. So here I am, the second installment of the Justice series for you guys. Now, the title of this message is called Justice, a War Between Two Kingdoms. David asked me to share, as I mentioned, that on any verses in the text regarding justice, and I went to Exodus 1:15 to 22. Before we get into this Mishpat series, I thought it was just good to lay the foundation. I believe the reason why it's important that we're talking about justice today is because it is a way of God's kingdom. Those that are citizens of God's kingdom get to carry out justice based on what Jesus has done for us. We see a narrative of God actively being present with his people in the way of relationship through justice from Genesis all the way to Revelations. So what is mishpat? We have to ask the question. The word mishpat in its various forms means to treat people equitably. Mishpat means that we give each person due what they deserve, either punishment or protection. Let me get into the text for you. Exodus 1, 15 to 22. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Bless the reading of God's word. Now imagine that you are forced out of your homeland, forced into a land that is not your own, ruled by savages that hate you, that want to oppress you, just because, that's right, they fear you. They fear what you will become. They fear the God that you serve in many ways. Imagine being a marginalized amongst the marginalized. Yes, and this time, most likely, a woman. Imagine being asked to kill your own people. Well, this is where we find ourselves in Exodus 1 with Shiphrah and Puah. Now, before I break down their relationship to the overall narrative of what's going on, I think it's worthy to just give you some of my talking points of where we're going today. And they're in three simple ways. I love alliteration, so I'm going to give them to you like this. What God sees, he saves. And what God saves, he sends. What God sees, he saves. And what God saves, he sends. And understanding what God sees reveals his kingdom and reveals who he is, that he's a God of justice. In this, we can clearly understand what his kingdom is and what his kingdom is not. In a second, we're going to see how these two kingdoms operate and what we can glean from them. Secondly, is God saves. What God saves points to the nature of how his kingdom operates. That he who is actively in relationship with his people sends representatives so that they would live out his kingdom values first with him and then in relationship with others. Thirdly, God sends. He sets apart his people to be representations that those that he has blessed so that they would extend what has been extended to them. This is good news. Yes, we get to extend love, grace, mercy, and also justice into the world based on God being with us. So let me just break it down for you. We're going to talk a little bit about, first before we go, I want to talk about Shiphrah and Puah. So it's worthy to note that many believe that they were either Egyptian women or Hebrew women. The overall narrative of this changes a little bit. If God used Egyptian women to save Hebrew women, that would just be awesome. But I think through their names and what their names and what they stood for, I believe that they were Egyptian women. But please, go do some research. So what were they called to do? They were called to deliver babies. So it was about two of them here. And it's worthy to note that they were women and they had names. This is very crucial. Even Pharaoh didn't have a name. This means king. So the fact that the writer of Exodus is giving them a name is significant. And they're called to deliver babies. They were probably in charge of a group of midwives, a gang of midwives, because it's probably unlikely that they were delivering all these children. It says in that time in the region that the Israelites, just the men alone, numbered 600,000 men alone. 600,000, not even including women and children. So yes, they were numerous. But now we get to see how the kingdom of this world operates, how Pharaoh operated. I want to read it again and then we'll get into it. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live. See, we see early on that Pharaoh wanted to kill God's people. Now, this kingdom operates from power, control, force. There's a lust for greed. Its mantra is simple. By any means, it manipulates, it cons, it coerces. This kingdom seeks to kill, steal, destroy, and always remain in power. It always remains to keep its foot on its victims' necks. It always aims to keep its victims down. It strives off its victims living in fear. It's this false power. It's this false sense of control. It aims to hurt. It aims to harm. It doesn't care who is in its way. We see the heartbeat of Pharaoh in verse 9 and 10. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal with them sharply with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. Hold on. So you're telling me that they were oppressed based off of fear? Fear did it. Insecurity did it. That he thought in two ways. One, that they were numerous, and two, that they would fight against us if war breaks out and leave. We get an early principle here, and that is fear always aims to control or kill that which is threatening its sense of power. But again, Pharaoh was right in some ways. They were numerous, 600,000 men in total. So he says, put slave masters to control them, oppress them, which means violently afflict them. He was coming for their necks. His aim was to steal, kill, and destroy. He wanted their dignity. Because ultimately he dreaded them. What's so crazy is that the Israelites forgot who they were in many ways. They maybe have forgot the promises of God, that he was coming to rescue them, that he was coming to give them a land. The fact that there were numerous points to the promise that God gave Abraham, that they will become a great nation. Some forgot this promise. I could imagine. Could you imagine being oppressed day in and day out, hard labor, and then it just intensifies? You would probably forget who you are. You probably would forget who your God is in many ways. But Shipra and Puah held on to this promise. The fact that Pharaoh was attacking God's boys, the Israelites' baby, it pointed to this. The kingdom of this world will always oppose God's kingdom. Killing these baby boys was a direct attack against the promise of God. Promise of the promise-keeping God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Whenever you hear that, usually in the Old Testament, it points to his faithfulness, that I will do what I say I will do. Again, he says, oppress them, give them hard labor. But then the text says in 12 and 20 that every time oppression came, threat came, they grew. And I thought this was worthy to mention that the kingdom of God, Jesus' kingdom, every time you try to oppose it, God is for it. And things begin to grow. That's just something to note. So what was he trying to do there? Him killing these babies, him summoning these women to kill these babies was an injustice. Injustice occurs when power is misused to take from others what God has given them, namely their life, dignity, liberty, and the fruit of their love and labor. Injustice is a strong using force and deceit to take from the weak. Again, it always aims to step on the necks of those that are already downcast. For me, my running definition would be simple then. Oppression and injustice always aims to destroy, kill, and distort the image of God on a person, people, or population. But we have to ask, why did Pharaoh attack the boys? So he knew that these baby boys would become bold men one day, that they would represent the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That they would actually represent the women and children. And he was threatening by them. And whatever you're threatened by, again, you try to kill or control. This is interesting because in my community, the dehumanization, the execution, and the removal of the father, the black father within the home has left catastrophic consequences that my community is still trying to rebuild today. These are just some of the injustices that I see around, that are roots of what I see around me today. Slavery, segregation, GI Bill, those not being afforded the same rights as others. Redlining, school to prison pipeline. Because of this, black students were more likely to get arrested, more likely to drop out, more likely to not finish school. Mass incarceration, 3 strikes. People were just getting locked up for petty things, and they were going away for life. Black men are more likely to get more time than white counterparts for the same crime, more likely to serve more time. Police brutality, more likely to get pulled over, more likely to get shot, filmed and not filmed. I mention some of these injustices because they plague my community. But more importantly, they point to the heartbeat of why I even came to the west side of Chicago and wanted to do Mishpat, to do Sadaka, which we'll talk about in a second. But what about you? What are some injustices that are around you? Sexual misconduct, the Me Too movement, there's a reason why people are stepping out. Sex trafficking, child labor, these are some big ones. But what are some small ones that you can think of? Maybe a janitor in your school being fair wages, those that are around your neighborhood and their environments that you live in, making sure that people are being treated fairly and equally. Those are just some, to name a few. So we see here that what God sees also comes to the injustice of what's around in the world. Sadly, this is the ugly reality of the earthly kingdoms, that they always try to oppose God. They always try to remain in control, function out of control, be driven by power. In this, we can see that God doesn't like this, and God's at work in this. Point number 2 is seeing how God's kingdom operates, that he saves, that he sends those to save as those that are representations of him, or that those that are citizens of him. Like, so his kingdom operates completely different. It's ruled by God, who is love, who is just, who sees his people, who sits on the throne of justice and righteousness. The soundtrack of his kingdom plays to the rhythm of love and faithfulness. Here we read what the Hebrew midwives did. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" Simply put, they drew a line in the sand to align themselves with the God of heaven. This is the difference between the two kingdoms. It's interesting that this word fear is used because Pharaoh and the Hebrew women had something in common. Yeah, fear. But see, their fear aimed to take, their fear aimed to control, their fear aimed to manipulate. But see, godly fear was sacrificial. It was reverence. It was seeing what God sees the way God sees it. They believed God and chose to come under his kingdom. See, Pharaoh was asking the women to co-sign on a principle and a value that wasn't of God's kingdom. Kill them. But see, the women understood that God created everyone in his image back in Genesis. Imago Dei, that everybody has a fingerprint of God. They may not be children yet, but they have a fingerprint of God, which is worthy to know. So they honor what God honors. And this is what I want to get at today. Like, we have to honor what God's honor. If we say that we're citizens of God's kingdom, then this is how we have to move. So what are you honoring? What are some injustices that you see that you're saying, man, God's fingerprint needs to be on this? I love this quote when I was studying. It says, the phrase fear God announces importance to the theme of the book of Exodus. The fear of God was a belief that certain things were wrong simply because they were contrary to the order of the life God woven into the fabric of the created world. Simply put, they didn't do it because it wasn't of God's kingdom. But what did they do? I believe what they do, they made a choice to go against that which was evil and pursue righteousness and faith. Based on who they knew, they actively stood against injustice. There's another word for justice that we get in the scriptures, and that's sadaka. I hope I'm saying that right. It means being just or being righteous. The word Sadaka refers to a life of right relationships. Those who live out of Sadaka are in the right relationship with God and therefore committed to putting right relationships all around them. Sadaka refers to the day-to-day living in which a person conducts all relationships with fairness, generosity, and, and equality, or to be equitable. The basic definition of sadaka would be this. Based on right relationship with God, there's a righteous life that's produced and is lived out publicly. There's a right relationship with God. And then there's a righteous life that's lived out publicly. Don't miss that. See, when you get sadaka and mishpat together, these two words for justice, which are seen over 36 times, you get the word social justice in the text, in the scriptures. Which is interesting because if you say social justice in certain camps, people think you have forgotten the gospel. You have forgotten the good news of Jesus Christ. But student body, I just want to let you know is the reason why we contend for justice is because Jesus died for us. We first believe that he did a work horizontally to make us right with God. He reconciled us in many ways. And then we now can have horizontal justice, reconciliation with our neighbors, that we can address the ills that are around us. Racial tensions, racism, white supremacy, these big things that are hard to tackle, that I pray that you guys are just beginning a conversation on. To say that God reigns and that Jesus is Lord is a political statement. It's a political statement because we believe that this kingdom reigns and is above all principalities and powers and dominions, not only in the spiritual but also in the natural, as usually governed by these things. Then we have to believe that God is above all things. Pharaoh didn't like this. Pharaoh definitely didn't like this. But even the other kings didn't like this. We see that we're in a unique time in history with COVID-19, the presidential election, and then social justice movements. I believe what 2020 has brought to us is that God has exposed our systems, our value systems, either in the church and outside the church. We're starting to learn that it's either going to be Christ or culture. We are going to have to check our value systems. I'm just going to name a couple things, and you can decide where you lie. Pro-life, NRA, Me Too, Republican, Democrat, Liberal, Conservative, Reform, Black Lives Matter. Just want to touch on that for a second. If you believe in the sanctity of life, and you may not agree with the whole movement, but if you agree with the sentiment Black Lives Matter, then what is the issue? Please be informed and please be educated on these things. Usually those that are up in arms about this social gospel, so to speak, are usually the ones that are not really willing to move. They do more criticizing. They lean more towards culture than they do Christ. They get easily offended when you say, well, this is a biblical construct. Like, this isn't God's word. To those that are having a hard time with this tension, please get God's heartbeat on it. Because Shipra and Pua, in many ways, got God's heartbeat on it. So now we see that what God sees, he saves, he actively puts those who represent him in places, but then we see that God sends, that God first blesses those to be a blessing to others. others. This concept has been around forever, starting in Genesis. I'm going to read it. 20 to 22, it says, "So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." See, when you choose to stand in the gap for God's kingdom, he blesses it. And we see here that the obedience of the Hebrew women resulted in not only them being blessed, but also their people being blessed. It says here in commentaries that God gave them families of their own. They didn't have husbands. They didn't have children, but God blessed them. And it wasn't something like, God, you owe me. It was God chose to smile and bless them because it was who he is. This is very important because we understand the power of standing in the gap, the power of doing Sadaqah and Mishpat. Because before there was a Moses to go down the river, to be raised by his mother, before Moses ran with shame and guilt, before God talked to Moses through a burning bush, before Moses did miracles and plagues, before there was a great exodus, before Moses split the Red Sea with a stick, before Moses, the prophet, the great deliverer of God that we all know and love, before that, there was that Moses, there was Shiphrah and Puah. There was two Hebrew women that believed God, that believed the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he was a promise-keeping God, that he was going to do what he said he was going to do, that he was going to come for his people. They actively lived out of Sadaqah, right relationship with God that gave them boldness and courage to stand in the gap. I have to ask, who's your Shiphrah? Who's your Puah? See, for me, there was an immigrant man that came from Puerto Rico. And then he met an immigrant woman that came from the Dominican Republic, and they fell in love, and they began to start a church, and they began to have children, and then they had complications having children. So they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to stand in a gap by adoption, and we're going to stand in a gap by foster care. And here I came, 21 days after being taken out of my mother's womb. I came to their home, and I stayed there for 2 years, and then my mom began custody, but I would go back and forth, and they would teach me the scriptures. They would show me the grace and love of God, and today I'm standing on their shoulders. Through my attachments and my stuff, they were faithful to God. And they lived out Sadaqah in a way that said, we're going to take care of that child. We're going to love him like he is our own. I also have to mention teachers growing up, having this learning disability. There was those that spoke life into me, and they said, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. I think God strategically used those people to also do a form of justice, a form of reform, of saying, "Hey, we believe you." And then when God told me to go to seminary, it was like, God, I can't do this. I gotta write papers, and you know that I write papers slow, and I read slow, and I write slow, and God's like, have I not been with you? Will I not fit the bill? I pulled a Moses, but God didn't let me fall on the waistline with excuses. And the institution that I go to, God blessed their heart. They said, hey, if we're going to have people at the table that are different from us, black and Spanish and everything, women at the table, then we're going to have to fit the bill. We're going to have to give them something to help them start this process. And the same institution right now, we're doing a series on trauma. And they're saying, hey, we know that this is breaking up a lot of things. We want to fit the bill for counseling. Counseling is between $160 and $180 right now. They say, all you got to pay is $10 and we'll cover the rest. That's another way that they're doing tzedakah based on right relationship with God. They, they believe that they should give rightly to those that are around them. Even my donors, as you know, we're navigators and we raise funds. And there's some people that will never be in the same rooms that I will be in. But man, through prayer, through financial giving, these same people are lovingly coming alongside me, and they're standing in the gap for those that my ministry get to touch. So what about you? Who's the shippers and pools in your life? God has strategically set somebody for your deliverance. Through his power and his might, he has sent someone. This is where I really want to take this to the head. I want to put the nail in the coffin, so to speak. See, when we talk about God seeing and God saving and God sending, I look at what God said to Moses. He says, I'm concerned for my people. He saw them. And then it says in Exodus 3:8 and 3:9, it said 3:10, it uses this word bring. I will bring you up out of Egypt. I will bring you into a land. And this word bring is synonymous with salvation. It's an action word. God says, I'm going to take them out. I'm going to take my people out. And then he says, he tells his people, he sends them because he asks them to be set apart. He asks them not to be like the other nations. And he asks them to do likewise. Deuteronomy 7:6 says, for you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the people on the earth to be his people, his prized possession. Then he says, do likewise. Deuteronomy 10:18 and 19, and I'm about to land this plane. Bear with me. He defends the causes, God defends the causes of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the alien, giving him food and clothing. And you are to love those who are aliens, for you yourselves were aliens in Egypt. God sets them apart, but he says, do the same. And that's what I'm here today. I'm saying we must do the same. If we're saying that we're Bible believing and we love God and we're citizens of God's kingdom, then we must do justice. See, I love what this pastor said. Pastor Michelle, she said, we extend what we desire. But I also believe we extend what has been extended to us. We can't say that we are citizens of God's kingdom and not do biblical justice and not actively play a role in seeing things as they should be. Moses was a prototype of Jesus, but Jesus was a better Moses. And he came to set us free. Luke 4:18 says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recover sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you have become a people of God. Once you have not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Jesus, God saw fit, even when you were dead in your sins, to see us in our sin, and said, I want relationship with them. So again, like I said, God came to do a vertical work so that we would be right with God, and then so that we could be right with others. We could live out of tzedakah and Mishpat. The gospel directly answers the problem of injustice. But will we answer the call? Will we answer the call? My couple applications for you is this. We have a choice to choose between a kingdom that takes or a kingdom that gives. A kingdom that is ruled by fear, or a kingdom that is lovingly come alongside in faith. Lived by slavery or lived by servanthood. God's kingdom is one of justice, ladies and gentlemen. To live as a citizen of God's kingdom requires living out of biblical justice. So we can use the word social justice. We can use both Sadaka and Mishpat together. They can marry. And this means to be in right relationship with God in every area of our life. Fairness, generosity, being equitable to one another, seeing people as how God sees them. This is what it means to be a citizen of God's kingdom. And lastly, what God sees, he saves, and what God saves, he sends. We get the privilege and honor to represent the God of justice and righteousness in relationship with Christ, sending, then telling others, calling others to Christ who can set them free. I'm out your way. But my hope that with this justice series is that you would fall in love and know the character of God in such a way that you would then not only be an ambassador, but also an advocate for the things that are around you, that as they're not, seeing things as they are and calling them as they not should be, putting gospel lenses on them. Iowa State, I love you guys. I'm so happy for you. I'm still praying for you that God will continue to do a work. May you be blessed by this message. Please go back, watch it, share it, tell others. Man, this one was for you. God put you on my heart in this way. So be blessed. Thank you.